You're about to hear one of the most fascinating podcasts available on the internet today. Listen in now as host John Leslie and his dynamic guests are talking about radio.
Hi, everybody. My name is John Leslie, and welcome to our program. And years ago, back when I was actually still in the business of chasing ratings around and trying to get ratings and trying to be number one at radio stations wherever I happened to be working, I remember a conversation that I had with an individual, and our lives always revolved around ratings. You had to get good ratings or you wouldn't make any money, wouldn't have a job. And it was always kind of an iffy proposition on how these rating systems worked. And this individual said, if a person could come up with a 100% foolproof way of actually metering the real numbers of people and be absolutely certain about it, they would be a billionaire. Well, that system I don't think has ever been found. But my guest today is a guy that certainly chased after it and came as close as anybody to coming up with a system that worked well for a lot of people, and he was very well known in the industry. And his name is Tom Birch. Many of you will remember the Birch Report. Tom, hello.
Hello. Glad to be back together with you, John. I don't know if you know this, but we both worked for Triangle Publications back in the day.
Yeah, Keith Nelson, who is our colleague in Boston. I guess you worked with him back, and this was in the Binghamton market, right? We're talking about.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's where I got my start in radio, Binghamton, New York.
Well, you're a guy. You're easy enough to do research on. When I started my research for this conversation, I found out that there are even trees named after you.
That's my legacy.
Yeah, and they used to make canoes out of your bark, you know. Well, let's go back to I didn't know. I really wrestled in my mind. I wrestled with the chronology of this conversation, and I think just the regular chronology from start to finish is going to be the best way that this works. Triangle Broadcasting owned radio stations in markets all across the country, in Philadelphia, Altoona, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York, I think Fresno, California, or Sacramento, or someplace out there, and other places. And I started with Triangle in the Binghamton market in 1971. Now, where does that place you?
I just left a year before you. It's a quick story, and then you can continue the line of questioning. Yeah, I'm a radio fanatic from about age 10. And when I got into high school, Triangle Publications had an Explorer Post 12, which I think they named after Channel 12 WNBF television.
Probably so.
Yeah. And once a month, we were allowed to. The Explorer Post was able to go on the air, and each member of the Post got an hour show. And I did that, and I parlayed that into a part-time job as a board operator. And then later, I was given an air position. I was doing weekends, and I left WMBF probably. I'm thinking it might have been May or June of 1970. I think you came in after that, and I think when you were at Triangle, I was across the street at WENE, which was then owned by Merv Griffin. And
Yes.
That was a top 40 station.
Yeah. And very successful in its day.
Yeah, it was number one.
Yeah, I would dare say that in those days, WENE was probably known nationwide. A lot of well-known jocks came out of there, and that was back in the days of John Landecker at WLS. He's been a guest on our show, and it's interesting. Another of your Explorer pals, maybe he doesn't go back as far as you, Jeff Simic. Does that name ring a bell?
No, it doesn't. Say it again, slower.
Jeff Simic.
No, I don't know him.
He was an earlier guest on our program. He later went into corporate communications, but spent a number of years in the Explorer Post. went on to do mornings at WHAM in Rochester, and he made an interesting comment. He said, "Can you imagine a company as big as Triangle Broadcasting turning their radio station over to a bunch of explorers? Just go in there and do whatever you want to do." Now, after you left Binghamton and you were still on the air and went to WENE, did you continue on the air for a very long time?
I did for a few years. Just another quick aside on WENE. So many great air talents came out of there. Like the Grease Man, for
Yeah,
example,
right.
Who is nationally famous. But I went from Binghamton to Rochester, where I worked for Larry White, and that's when I worked with people like the Grease Man, and and then I was recruited to go across the street to WBBF, which was owned by Lynn Broadcasting at the time.
That was a pretty big station then, wasn't it?
It was struggling because WAXC, which was the station programmed by Larry White, was giving them fits, and so they hired a programming-oriented general manager named Dan Clayton. His real name is Ken Walt, and Ken put together an all-star staff. He hired just great people wherever we can find them. And I was recruited to go across the street. I was doing teen time, 6 to 10 p.m. And so I went from WAXC to WBBF. The program director, by the way, at BBF when I was there was Mark Driscoll. And Mark worked for Buzz Bennett. I don't know if you remember that name.
No.
So Buzz Bennett was the guy that made KCBQ in San Diego famous. And then, Buzz became a consultant. And Buzz was a consultant to Heftel Broadcasting, which when I was at WBBF in the year, this is 1974, Heftel owned 13Q in Pittsburgh, and they put Y100 in Fort Lauderdale, Miami on the air.
Mm-hmm.
And you had another guest recently, Joel Denver, who's also a friend of mine.
Oh, yes, yes.
Joel was the program director of WMYQ. I think this is in 1973 or 74. Anyway, I was recruited by Bill Tanner, who was the program director at the time of Y100. And Y100, when they signed on in 1973, they were consulted by John Rook, who was nationally famous. John was previously the program director of WLS in Chicago. And they plugged in a tight top 40 playlist, and their job was to knock off the number one station in the market, which is WQAM, which was on 560, like WFIL, where Joel worked at one point, and where my brother-in-law Ray Quinn was later a program director. The Y100 went up against WQAM with a cash call contest. And it was a very simple contest. When your phone rings, don't say hello. Answer your phone. I listen to the new sound of Y100. And now this is in 1973. The jackpot was $50,000.
Oh, wow.
1973. You do the math on what that's worth today. We used to joke around about Cease Heftel. He was a congressman in Hawaii, a multimillionaire. But we used to joke around about Cease being a high roller who would light his cigars with $100 bills. But I went to work for Y100. I was there for a little less than a year as assistant program director and 6 to 10 p.m. Jock on Y100. And then another member of that staff was E. Alvin Davis, who's a very well-known consultant in the 80s, 70s, and 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And E. Alvin left to go to New Orleans and to program WNOE. And he hired me to come in and be assistant program director and do drive time, 3 to 6 p.m. And so I was there for a while, and then I was recruited away by Storrs Broadcasting, which is the owner of WQAM, but they also own KOMA in Oklahoma City. And so I went from New Orleans to Oklahoma City, and in Oklahoma City, that's basically where I started my research company.
Well, it's like alphabet soup with all these call letters. And I've in about 1973 or 72 or 73, I was still in news at that time. I had not switched over to doing programming and morning shows. I was offered a news job at WQAM, and
Great place to work.
it was right on a
They
canal.
were. Yeah, well, it was a wonderful location. Stores was not the highest paying company.
I think that's what stood between me and taking the job.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. But they offered me enough money, and what I wanted more than anything else was to become a program director. So they offered me the job of program director at KOMA. And I was 22 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? This is for me. This has my name on it. So we packed up the car and drove from New Orleans to Oklahoma City, and we were going up against WKY, which was owned by the Oklahoma Publishing Company that had the number one television station in the market, and
Mhm.
they owned the newspaper. So they absolutely owned media in Oklahoma
Sure,
City.
sure. That's always a
And,
plus.
and so when I arrived in February of 1976, the most recent Arbitron ratings for Oklahoma City had WKY with a 16.7 share of audience persons 12 plus, and 50,000 watt full time KOMA clear channel station that you could hear in 16 states and 4 countries at night had a 4.5 share.
Oh,
So I had my work cut out for me. And of course, the other thing that was going on was WKY was consulted by Kent Burkhart, and they were keeping their commercials at 12 minutes an hour, which back in those days was a low commercial, quote unquote, low commercial load, while KOMA was running 18 minutes of commercials an hour. So, long story short, when I was in Oklahoma City, we developed a system of research. We started doing what we call preference share study, a very simple study where we would call people randomly selected to ask them what radio stations they heard in the past week, and of those stations, which station did you listen to the most? And uh, and from that initial sample, we recruited people into a panel of of listeners that listened to either WKY or KOMA, and there was a third FM station that the caller has escaped my old memory at this stage, but they were also had a fairly sizable audience, and we would for this panel we would play about 12 to 15 uh, uh, snippets of songs, and we'd ask each respondent, "Are you familiar with the song?" And if they were, we asked them on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is you hate it and 5 is you love it. Where would you rate it?
hmm.
And are you not at all, somewhat, or very tired of hearing it? And we plug these results into a computer program. I hired a guy to do all this for me. I couldn't do that myself. And we financed this whole thing. This is how Birch Radio got started. We financed this, and I had the approval of the president of stores to do this by having other non fully competitive radio stations pay us. And so they paid a subscription fee, which underwrote our cost of the interviewing and the cost of the computer programmers that I had to hire. And we had the most sophisticated research system, I think, in the United States in Oklahoma City in 1976 and 1977. And the results were a year after I got there, we went from, with WKY at a 16.7, we had a 4.5 share. 1 year later, KOMA playing 18 minutes of commercials an hour versus WKY's 12 minutes. KOMA had a 10.6 share and WKY had a 10.1.
Oh, wow.
And it was because of a tight playlist, a tight, well-researched playlist, and I really attribute all of this to us, the research, telling us what people really wanted to hear on the radio.
We're talking with Tom Birch, who is the founder of and was CEO of Birch Research Corporation, and that has always been the mystery, hasn't it, Tom? How to really get the accurate figures, and I'll use as an example when I left Binghamton and went to they put me on the morning. I left news and went on to the morning show, and something apparently happened. A positive thing happened. I got a 36 share. And
I'll take that all day long.
in fact, in fact, Arbitron actually didn't send the book out right away when they were due because they thought a mistake had been made, and so within a matter of 24 hours, I had a job offer. I had a number of job offers. One of them
I'm
was
sure you did.
one of them was at WFBL in Syracuse, and they had imported a whole new staff. It was time to wipe out. They were struggling at one time. They were a really hot commodity in Syracuse, and
Trying to wipe out WNDR.
yeah, and WAGN, and there were a
Yep.
lot of big names up there. So a whole air staff was imported, and I was part of that group that was imported. And so we erased the slate clean, and we started over. Super Radio, 14 FBL, and the first Hooper survey came out,
Mm-hmm.
and we were just shooting for the roof. I mean, the Hooper had us. I don't remember the numbers, but we were dancing in the hallway.
John, I got just a quick question.
Yeah.
Was when you were there, was WFBL consulted by Mike Joseph?
Prior to the time that we were there.
Okay,
we
I
had
remember him being involved with FBL.
yeah, we had a new program director, Jim Ashbury.
Oh, I know Jim. He came out of WNBF.
Yes, he did, and then he worked at every radio station in the United States.
Yeah.
Every 50,000 watt station. WFLA, WCCO, just on and on it goes.
Great
So,
guy.
So anyhow, what happened was that the Hooper report showed us going in the right direction, and then about a month later, the Arbitron came out, and we bit the big one.
Yeah, that's because of the Hooper was more accurate. We saw the same thing time and again when you looked at the Birch ratings in the 1980s versus the Arbitron ratings. CHR, Urban, and Album Rock always was significantly higher in Birch ratings than in Arbitron, and the reason for that is the problem of non-response to the diary methodology. Arbitron did a landmark study in 1978 on non-response, and they found and reported, to their credit, that non-responders tended to be heavier radio listeners, and they tended to be younger and more ethnic. And so, because of Arbitron's low response rates, and I think back in the 70s and 80s, the typical response rate, that is the percentage of the pre-designated sample that ended up actually reporting and to the survey, was hovered around 30 to 35%. And with our telephone methodology that we used at Birch Radio, our response rates were 50 to 55%. So we included a lot more of these non-responders in our results, and stations like WFBL, any kind of CHR or rock or urban-oriented format did much better in telephone-based surveys. And of course, Hooper was a telephone coincidental survey, but they were huge differences. So I'm not at all surprised.
Now, when you talk about non-responders, explain to me what that inside term means.
The when for example, with a diary sample, Arbitron puts together a sample of randomly chosen respondents, households that they mail the diaries to, and the step one is they try to recruit people. They start over the phone to ask if you're interested in participating in the survey. If you say yes, they ask you how many people are living in the household, age 12 or older, and the third step is they mail the diaries to the household. If only 30% of the people that they pre-designated to be part of the sample return the diaries, that means 70% of their pre-designated sample is not participating.
Yeah.
And there are huge differences between responders and non-responders.
Well, one diary makes a big difference.
I'm sorry, didn't hear your question.
I have always understood that one diary makes a big difference in the final figures.
Oh, it could be huge. If somebody, for example, and here's another problem with the diary methodology. And by the way, another aside here, it was just announced yesterday that Nielsen is finally doing away with the diary methodology. They're going to what they call a mobile diary, where respondents will have the opportunity to determine how they respond to the survey online. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction. But with the diary survey as it's currently being conducted, typically the female head of household fills out the diary for everybody in the household.
Mm-hmm.
Because the teenagers and the husband don't have time to do it. So that if the female head of household is not working, she has the time to fill out the diaries. And so if they respond at all, she'll fill out the diaries for everybody in the household. And of course, what happens?
Oh.
Whatever she thinks they're listening to is what gets reported. And that is not necessarily always accurate.
Now, wasn't there a thing and I don't believe it was your company, but one of the telephone survey radio rating survey companies did a thing called aided recall, uh, where they helped the person they were speaking to. Maybe I'm making this up. I guess it was something like, "Hey, hi, I'm whatever this company is, and we're doing radio research. What radio station did you listen to today?" And if the
Mhm.
answer was, "I don't remember," and then they would say, "Does 14 mean anything to you?"
Well, we never did that. I don't know who does anything like that. That obviously biases the result. But we would have a series of questions that we would ask in our interview to try to get people to hone in. They'd say if somebody said to us, for example, uh, uh, we'll open up by asking what radio stations did you listen to yesterday afternoon between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. If somebody says, or no, we didn't even start that way. Did you listen to the radio at all between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m.? Whether you were at home, in your car, or at some other location away from home. And if they ask yes, then we would follow on with, do you remember when you started listening? And if the respondent says something like, I think I started listening at about 4 o'clock, we would say, did you start at exactly 4 o'clock or a few minutes before or after 4 o'clock? And then we'd zero in on what is the accurate starting point of listening. Then we'd ask, what station did you hear? And we would record their response. Very seldom did anybody give us call letters. We would get the name of the station, or more often, the dial position would be
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. And then we'd ask, is that on AM or FM? And then we'd ask, the same series of questions as to, when did you stop listening to that station? Did you do any other listening between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m.? And it's an iterative process, but by using a telephone interview, we had much more accurate reporting than what was happening with a self-administered diary
Yeah.
that very often was filled out days after the listening actually occurred.
Or at the end of the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
As
Well,
of,
it would be a few weeks because they had to return the diaries were mailed out. They would receive them. The diary keeping period was Thursday through Wednesday. And so they had to, it could be as much as, a week, but not more than a week.
Well, it's interesting. You said something interesting that really um, resonates with me. We're talking with Tom Birch, who's the CEO and founder of Birch Research Corporation, and we're going to talk about the breakout of Birch nationwide here in just a few minutes. But when I was in Kansas City, I'd finished a very successful run in Des Moines and was offered a job at a country station in Kansas City, KCKN, and we were going up against the giant. And unfortunately, our story is not like your story in Oklahoma City. We never could slay the dragon, and they were WDAF 61 country. They
Oh,
had
yeah.
dial position and format in their logo,
Yep.
and they said it into and out of every country song they played. So everybody knew 60. If you stop somebody on the street and said, "What radio station do you listen to?" they would even do it with the inflection that the jocks did. 61 country. And you'd want to strangle them.
Yep. Yep.
So when the Birch Research Group really broke out and At one point, you had what, over 1,000, 1,200 people working for you all the way across the country?
Yeah, we at our peak we had over 1,200 employees.
And what did those people do? I don't mean
Well,
I don't mean individually.
no,
We don't have time for that.
yeah, no, most of that staff were interviewers. We had sales offices, at our peak in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, Atlanta, and we had a Canadian subsidiary. And between 1983 and 1986, we had offices in Toronto and Montreal. Uh, but the vast majority of our staff were interviewers.
Hmm. Now, the way you guys make your money is you sell the results to the radio stations,
Yeah.
you did TV as well, right?
Well, no, we didn't do. We ultimately merged with Scarborough Research. What happened was in 1987, I sold Birch Research Corp to VNU, which is an acronym for the United Dutch Publishing Companies, and I cannot say their Dutch name. It's about 30 characters long. But VNU wanted to acquire, media research and market research companies in the United States, and we were the third company that they acquired. And after they acquired us, they subsequently acquired Scarborough Research, which was the leading provider of newspaper uh, audience ratings
Hmm.
and qualitative research. And Scarborough is a world-class product. And so the company, beginning in 1987, was renamed Birch Scarborough Research. And in 1987, after the merger, I was the CEO of the combined entity, and I stayed on for until the end of 1989, and then I left and started a radio group, which is a whole other story. But during the years 87 to and beyond, Birch Scarborough did indeed measure television, but we did it qualitatively. We were not competing against Nielsen in the quantitative side. We were providing qualitative information that radio, TV, and newspapers could sell with.
Well, that was a pretty quick ascension into the big time for you. That was about 7 or 8 years, 9 years after you were an explorer.
No, that, but the we I really started Birch Radio Research in 1979, expanded it pretty rapidly between 1979 and 1983. Nielsen uh, tried to buy our company, made a stab at buying our company in 1983, and it didn't pan out. But they came back in 1984. We were close to selling the company to Nielsen in 1984. But Nielsen, the CEO of Nielsen Radio, or Nielsen Media, I should say, uh, was concerned about the fact that we had a fairly thin top management, and they wanted us to uh, engage some people that could help us with major national advertisers and agencies. And I recruited three people to come on board to help us out. Uh, Dick Weinstein, who had been the head of agency sales for Arbitron and was, a manager at a major television rep firm, joined us as I recruited him to become president, and I moved myself up to CEO. And Dick in turn wanted to recruit Bill Livick, who was the head at the time of Arbitron radio sales, and Bill Engel, who had been product manager for Arbitron. So those three gentlemen joined us in 1984. And once they came on board, we took off with success with major national agencies and advertisers, thanks they improved the quality of the product. We became we did some things that from a quality standpoint
Hmm.
allowed us to pass muster with media research directors at major national advertising agencies. We managed to get BBDO New York to switch from Arbitron to Birch. Then we got McCann Erickson, Ogilvy and Mather, McDonald's, Delta Airlines, Anheuser-Busch, and on and on. We got to, I think by 1988, early 1989, Birch Radio had about a 40% share of of national advertisers and agencies that were using the service as what we call currency. That means that they were evaluating radio stations and determining what they'd be willing to pay based on Birch versus Arbitron.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we had the recession
Yeah.
that happened in 1991, and radio stations and groups that were buying both services, uh, many of them said, you know what, as much as we like to support Birch Radio, we can't we can't support two services. And we had a 40 share, and Arbitron had a 60 share,
Mm-hmm.
and Birch Radio lost out. And a lot of the big groups dropped the service, and long after I was, hang on just a second, my alarm is going off here. Alexa, stop.
Well,
Do you have one of those?
I do. And my phone was ringing a little while ago. Yeah, that's one of the pleasures of working at a home studio. The home phone rings.
Yeah, we've got that same problem. But anyway, I finally I left the company at the end of 1989, and to my horror, in December 1992, 2 weeks before Christmas, VNU shut down Birch Radio ratings, and they did that because they made a deal with Arbitron. VNU owned a company that Arbitron wanted to acquire, and Arbitron, of course, wanted VNU to shut down Birch Radio, and they made a swap. And at the time, I don't know whether it was 1,200, but it's probably close to it. 1,000 plus employees were let go 2 weeks before Christmas,
Oh, wow.
and there was nothing I could do about it.
That
but
was
just watch.
always a problem.
Yeah, just watch from afar.
Yeah. Now, you were also, prior to becoming involved in ownership of radio stations, you were also involved with Simmons Market Research Bureau.
Yes, briefly. Those were my partners, Bill Engel and Bill Livick. They recruited me to come in to be a partner and chief financial officer. They did an amazing acquisition. They bought Simmons Market Research Bureau, which I think had been around for 40 plus years, and was one of the two major providers of consumer research to the industry. It was a subsidiary of J. Walter Thompson, and JWT ran it into the ground. And Livick and Engel purchased Simmons, and they were their goal was to turn it around. And it didn't happen right away. I think they bought it in 19 or let's see, it would be probably 1998 or 1999. And I'm sorry, I'm a decade off. Yeah, no, I'm right. 1989 or 1999, and they recruited me to join them in 2001. And at the time that I joined them, they had a $5.5 million operating loss in Simmons. And so my contribution was to lower their operating expenses and to find a means of financing these losses while they and their team turned around the product and the marketing. And they were very successful on the product and marketing side, and I was very successful on the cost side and the financing side. And I left them at the end of 2003. Uh, uh, I'm sorry, the beginning of 2003. Left at the end of 2002.
Mm-hmm.
But they went on to sell Simmons at a sizable gain to Experian in 2004. So it was a successful ride, and everybody did well.
We're talking with Tom Birch. He was the founder of Birch Research Corporation and currently the CEO of Birch Broadcasting Corporation. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But before we do that, my brain cannot figure out how, in this day and age, with all of what is available in the way of audio signals coming from the fewer and fewer terrestrial stations and more podcasts and internet radio stations and online streaming, how does one even go about doing what, trying to capture realistic figures for who listens to what?
It's very, very difficult. And, I applaud Nielsen for announcing finally yesterday that they're abandoning the diary and they're going to go to an online uh, uh, data capture instrument. By the way, another side. I'm a member of the NAB COLRAM commit. That's the Committee on Local Radio Audience Measurement, and I've been on this committee since 2016. And we have been on a campaign to get Nielsen to update their methodology. And I believe that our banging on them has finally paid off. They're making the change, but it's very, very difficult. The first problem is finding people to participate in the sample. uh, whereas back in the day it was very simple. We could do a combination of listed and unlisted telephone households, and everybody had a landline. Now, most households are cell phone only, so it's much harder to figure out who is where and how to contact them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first problem. The second problem is, everybody's inundated with spam phone calls. So people don't want to take calls, they don't want to answer their phones, and very few people want to participate in anything because they think they're being scammed. So it's a real challenge. And I will say that not only are media research results questionable, far more questionable today than they were even 10 years ago, but all survey research results are questionable. It's a huge challenge.
Everything is questionable. One cannot um, hope to figure out what you're reading is true or not true. Eh, A lot of the information that is disseminated to us looks so real and so true, and it turns out that it's not true at all. We can
I
only
agree.
we can only hope that those people in positions of authority who are making big decisions for Ford Motor Company and uh, whoever else, McDonald's, they have people who, well, maybe Budweiser uh, had a made some bad decisions, or at least got themselves caught into a bad situation. But I don't know how they know where to spend their money, where to spend their advertising dollars.
All I can say is that the current state of media research is it helps them make a better educated guess.
Okay, all right. Well, apparently you got the broadcasting end out of your system, because your group is Lakes Media,
That's
and
right.
you have 6 radio stations. Um, Tell us about that. You have 98.3, 95.3, 1045. You tell me about
Well, we have a group of stations that serve South Side Virginia and North Central North Carolina, and we do have 6 stations. These are very small market stations. We are in what are called quote unquote unrated markets. So to the extent that we use any audience research, we're limited to really small sample studies that are done by Nielsen in their county coverage and that what they call their NRD, National Regional Database. But we don't sell based on audience ratings. We sell based on results.
it. Mm-hmm.
And we have a small local sales team, and where we get most of our money, virtually all of it now, is from local advertisers, where we have local relationships. And when an advertiser puts a schedule on our stations, they can see the results, and when they see the results, they renew and continue with us. Uh, the challenge that and I know I speak for small market broadcasters, not just small market, all broadcasters in radio. Uh, Over the last 5 years, we are losing so much money to digital. Advertising agency buyers and planners are often younger than radio listeners, and a 25 to 35-year-old planner or buyer probably does not listen nearly as much as a 45 to 64-year-old person that they may be trying to reach. And these younger buyers believe that nobody's listening to radio anymore. You have to be completely into digital. And so our challenge is to, educate potential, advertisers on the importance of radio as a top of the funnel means of reaching people so that they will get to your website. And once they get to your site, that's where you make the sale. But to get them to the site, you need mass media, and radio continues to be, and the number one audio source. 90% plus of adults 18 plus will tune radio, for 5 or more minutes in a week. So radio is still viable, but it's becoming a harder story to convey. And I can tell you that even in our small markets, 5 years ago, 30% of our total revenue was, transaction oriented, agency placed business. Last year was 10%.
Mm.
And it's going to be, I think, at 10% or lower this year. Fortunately, we've made up, some of the difference because our local sales are strong, but it's a real challenge. Digital is really, really radio's number one challenge.
As you talk about the relationships that you have with your local advertisers in the markets that you serve, you're singing my song, and many of the guests that we have had on this program, most recently Robbie Bridges, who was on with me recently, and he is just passionate about that there are radio listeners out there, and if you provide them with something to listen to, they will listen to it. It's easy to do, and this reminds me of a pendulum that is swinging and back to where it was when I started in the business in 1975, 1974 in Weirton, West Virginia. Every store in that community listened to our radio station. And every one of them advertised on our radio station. That was their
We have the same. If you go into South Boston, Virginia, and you walk into a store, very likely they're listening to 95.3 WHLF, which is our adult contemporary station. You go into a store in South Hill, Virginia, they'll be listening to Rewind 1019, our classic hit station. We have really great relationships with local businesses, and that's why we're still alive. But we would not have these relationships if we were not local. You really have to pay attention to the local community, and they pay you back because they appreciate that we're around.
and when there is a significant event has occurred in your community or is about to occur, you probably don't have big snowstorms where you are, but those kinds of things that people still rely on their local radio signal to get the information that they need right now. And
Absolutely.
I, I, I just, I'm confused. I've mentioned probably too many times that we recently purchased a new vehicle, and there is the buttons on the dashboard, which looks like a big screen TV. There is audio source, AM, FM, Sirius XM, and podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And those are your choices. And it's too easy to reach for Sirius XM or podcast or something other than AM and FM. But we still do. I mean, it's in our blood, I guess. And so we still support our local stations, and we listen to the ones that are providing local programming.
Well, if we lose our local focus, we're going to lose them to podcasts and Sirius XM. Local is the most important thing. Of course, you still have to provide a great listenable product. You got to play the songs that people want to hear. But people want to hear local weather. They want to hear local PSAs, and they want to hear local commercials.
Yeah.
So I think all of that, and of course, most importantly, they want to have people that they know and love, as personalities on the stations. So local is important.
They're allowed to listen to this podcast. I'll give them that.
Excellent.
Well, Tom Birch, I want to thank you. We're all out of time here, and as I've said to a couple of people, not very many. We've done a number of these podcasts, and it's almost like talking to royalty, talking to a guy like you. I mean,
stop.
Come on. I mean, everybody in the business knows you. I just mentioned your name in passing to Joel Denver, And he said, "Oh yeah, Tom Birch, he's a great guy," And as everybody knows you, everybody knows what you did, and respect you for being able to develop such a significant industry within our industry. And it just is such a thrill for me to have an opportunity to talk with you and have you as a guest on our program.
John, thank you. I'm honored, and it's great to reconnect with you. And I've been listening to some of the other podcasts. And you're doing a great job, and I'm so proud to be here.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Talking About Radio with John Leslie, a podcast that features conversation with the greatest broadcast professionals everywhere. If you'd like to be a guest on Talking About Radio and share your favorite radio stories, just send an email to talkingaboutradio@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening.